Affirmative.
All right. Did y'all get the email chain though?
Let me check real quick.
Okay.
All right, yeah, I got it.
And is your partner good or? Okay, so are we good to start? Just waiting for the opponents to confirm.
Yeah, sorry, but just like 1 minute, my bad.
Okay.
Okay, we are good.
Sounds good. So I'm Elon Arias, an SCU speaking neg first. Is everyone good? Maria and I negate. Our first argument is climate change. Lefebvre last month finds that the US just passed the largest climate change policy in history that will produce emission reductions and help combat global warming. Unfortunately, high-speed rail reverses this. O'Toole in 2021 finds that it takes much more energy to power extremely fast trains. Additionally, there's a massive amount of energy required to build and replace the infrastructure needed to sustain high-speed rail. This would lock in harmful usage of fossil fuels. We need to act now. Zalk and Dreyfus in 2021 indicate that we are approaching the point of no return. In this do or die moment, the biggest immediate opportunity is to cut emissions in order to effectively respond to the ongoing climate emergency. Russell 21 concludes that the consequences are massive and linear. Limiting warming by a tiny amount can save millions of lives, protect areas of land, and give species a chance of survival. Every 10 centimeters of sea level rise affects another 10 million people. Our second argument concerns racial justice. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights in 2014 finds that eminent domain is on the decline as federal money and direction diminish, which resulted in eminent domain rarely being invoked. Unfortunately, Jaffe in 2021 indicates that infrastructure projects negatively affect communities of color. Infrastructure construction bisects ethnic communities as proven by California. If the system extends beyond, other communities will be impacted. Davis in 2022 furthers that the proposed Texas high-speed rail system is set to use eminent domain, which sets a precedent for future projects. Furthermore, Bosch 13 writes that California's high-speed rail system uses eminent domain as well. Soman 15 finds that eminent domain targets minority groups and has devastating impacts on communities. Economic development takings have forcibly displaced several million poor and racial minorities into cyclical poverty and violence. Indeed, the judge has a moral obligation to reject any instance of racism. The Oasis in 09 writes that when we tackle discrimination, we also eliminate the fuel which feeds social exclusion, poverty, violence, and inequality. Racism affects access to education, healthcare, employment, wages, housing, and more, which creates ongoing poverty. Thus, we must aim to tackle and eradicate discrimination. Our third argument concerns water pollution. Brobeck in 2021 finds that Biden's new infrastructure bill aims to rebuild failing, aging, and outdated water systems. The act dedicates approximately $82.5 billion for a wide range of critical water investments. The largest water-related investments are for improvements in safe drinking water and sanitation. Unfortunately, Liddon 2019 indicates that HSR construction contributed to a large number of organic compounds and mineral consumption in the water. And Dowie in 2020 furthers that there exists a close relationship between high-speed railways and environmental pollution, which mainly comprises water pollution that occurred during construction of the railway. The sewage along the high-speed railway mainly comes from the production and maintenance sites of the high-speed train, which compromises oily sewage, domestic sewage, car wash wastewater, and highly concentrated fecal sewage. Problematically, Campbell in 2019 finds that low-income and minority communities often face disproportionate burdens of exposure to contamination sources and environmental pollution, and associations with race and ethnicity persist even after accounting for differences in income. Community water systems that serve communities with lower median incomes, lower rates of homeownership, and higher proportion of Hispanic or non-white residents have been associated with higher levels of nitrates and arsenic. Health-based violations were more common in poor communities with higher proportions of Hispanic or African American residents. Thus, Maria and I so proudly negate.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Everyone good? Okay. And also, I'm on mobile hotspot right now because internet's not great. So if I cut out, just let me know and tell me what you after the speech is concluded. Okay. Time begins in 3, 2, 1. Miraloma affirms contention 1 is politics. HSR can reverse electoral doom for Democrats this November. Herbert 22 explains support for HSR is high among Democratic voters. Recent polling suggests that Democrats are likely to lose control of the House and Senate. This proposal could unify the party and voters and secure the midterm elections. Empirically, DOT 12 finds 98% of transportation projects were approved by the voting public in 2008. If Republicans get control, Kondraki 21 writes, stalemate in an unsuccessful seeming Biden presidency could re-elect Trump. This would be devastating. Star 19. Trump's second term guarantees nuclear accidents and nuclear war. Trump's attacks on America's alliances and unilateral withdrawal from arms control treaties have made the world far more dangerous. That would be devastating as Star 15 concludes, a nuclear winter will cause humans to die from nuclear famine in a mass extinction event. Intention 2 is rural healthcare. Warsaw 17, rural Americans, 20% of the U.S. population face inequities that result in worse healthcare disparities. Limited access to care makes finding solutions more difficult. Rural residents must travel long distances to reach a healthcare provider. This is due to a lack of transportation, cited all 13. Transportation is necessary for healthcare and medication access, particularly for those with chronic diseases. Without transportation, delays lead to chronic disease exacerbations with worsened health outcomes. CM21 quantifies, nearly 4 million people do not seek care because they don't have access to reliable and safe transportation, thankfully. HSR will connect rural and urban areas. Comga near GT 14. HSR stations can lead to integration of local and long-distance public transportation systems. HSR's decrease in cost per passenger helps to decrease the total cost of travel, jump-starting rural cities. Conversely, HSR also allows the doctors to come to them. Will corroborates high-speed rail allows for the rapid flow of medical staff between regions, leading to huge improvements in health levels. Empirically in Korea, Choi et al. 19, the implementation of the KTX produced positive effects on healthcare outcomes of patients with severe conditions, debilitating diseases, or chronic and acute diseases. Healthcare access is key. WP19 concludes preventive care services can save over 100,000 lives in the U.S. every year. Chronic diseases are responsible for 7 out of 10 American deaths annually. Conditions like these can be preventable. Contention 3 is megaregions. The U.S. economy is currently spiraling into catastrophe. Vanguard 22 finds inflation, growth, and monetary policy have all failed to live up to expectations. Some economies are flirting with recession. U.S. infrastructure isn't helping. McBride 20 writes, the U.S. infrastructure systems are reaching the end of their lifespan. A federal investment gap will cost $10 trillion in lost GDP in the next 2 decades. Luckily, HSR solves. Wang 18 reports, by shortening travel time, HSR is regarded as the most competitive transport mode that corresponds to mega regions. In fact, Shepard 16 writes, the nervous system of these megacity clusters are the high-speed rail lines which physically connect these once separate cities into contiguous urban zones. Megaregions are key to future development. World Bank 16 writes, urbanization can contribute to sustainable growth by increasing productivity, allowing innovation and new ideas to emerge. Wu 15 explains, megaregions currently account for more than 80% of the nation's economic activity. HSR-enabled growth is key. Proc 09 concludes that high-speed rail will fuel our economy through the recession of the next 50 years. In 08 alone, Boston University laments the crisis spread beyond U.S. borders. 100 million people around the world fell into extreme poverty. The crisis persisted because of a very slow recovery that lasted more than 5 years. Contention 4 is clash of the titans. Federal HSR investment kickstarts a new domestic industry. The LPC rejoices. High-speed rail federal investment will spark a manufacturing renaissance. Perth 12 warrants. If demand for rail increases, Midwestern manufacturers will expand production. Federal investment is necessary, he warns. Firms will be reluctant to build plants without evidence of a sustained commitment to high-speed rail. The ASBN 20 confirms. A new HSR network will create a manufacturing supply chain made up of thousands of specialty companies. The House Transportation Committee 21 furthers. Current statute authorizes grant programs to invest in passenger railroad. These include a Buy America condition that requires 100% of manufactured goods used be made in the U.S. A domestic industry enables the U.S. to compete abroad. Mullen 20 writes, deploying new American transportation is important for our foreign policy. The U.S. has a long history of export industrial expertise. Combining HSR with U.S. leadership would present a compelling alternative to China as we enter a new global power competition. Nigel 21 concludes, whether high-speed rail firms will be able to maintain their competitive edge in the global market depends on whether policymakers enact changes to counteract and push back against CRRC. Competition is key to ensure global economic prosperity. ORF 20 writes, Chinese overseas lending is particularly severe in Asian African countries. Opacity poses immense threats to countries which have weak institutions and poor governance structures. HSR is the future of China's mercantilist aspirations. ITIF 21. China's use of forced technology transfers for HSR has broader economic implications. China's goal is to bankrupt foreign firms that otherwise lead innovation and competition. ORF concludes, without alternatives, governments would remain indebted to China for decades. Jones 16 concludes, a debt crisis in Africa increased poverty by 125 million. Does we affirm?
May I please have uniqueness Ev on C1
Okay.
and link Ev for C4? Maria, do you want anything? All right, just those two, please.
Okay, you wanted link Ev on what?
C4, please.
So all the link Ev or just a specific card or what?
Yeah, all the link cards.
Okay.
The one.
As well, could you please see your link evidence in the C3 on your West Water argument?
Wait, was that? Oh, you were asking me, Fred?
Yeah.
One?
The link evidence in the C3 on water pollution.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, thank you.
It's 2 cards, so I'll send you both.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so mine's been sent. Did y'all get it? Did you get it?
My partner is bringing it up. Give him like 1 sec.
Okay.
Yeah, it might take a while. It looks like it's in like a bunch of separate docs. Give us like 2 minutes real quick.
Okay.
And I'll keep my hands on the camera up as well.
Yeah. This is all a link. Let me know if you need anything else. But in the meantime, we can start cross.
Okay, now I would just want to make sure I get it before we start. Still hasn't came in. And yeah, just making sure you also put the uniqueness for C1, right?
Yeah, that should be on the very top.
Yeah, I haven't gotten it yet. Okay, I just got it. Sounds good. Yeah, we can start cross.
Okay, you spoke first. You can have first question.
Yeah, can I just have 2 quick questions on C4?
Sure.
First, what do these manufacturing companies in the United States make that makes us able to compete against China?
Things like steel, things like a lot of things that are necessary in the manufacturing of HSR.
Okay, steel, sounds good. And also, can you clarify the impact on C4?
The impact on C4 is basically counteracting Chinese hedge. So with our foreign policy being increased by HSR, what we would do is provide a counterbalance to China. And that means that China won't like debt trap any developing countries. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
On climate change, right? So can you just like go through the link real quick? Because I understood your uniqueness, but I don't understand the link.
Right. The link is just that HSR requires large amounts of energy to be built and powered. We tell you that when HSR is built, we see an increase of emissions of 60%. And it's really important to act now because our ZOC evidence says that we're approaching the point of no return, meaning that if HSR does happen, we pass the breaking point.
Okay.
On politics, would you say that more recent evidence is more important than anything else?
I wouldn't say that it's more important than anything else, but I would say it's pretty important in the context of a debate around here.
So just making sure more recent evidence is more important when it comes to politics. Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Like, it might not be the most important, but like more recent evidence is like important when it comes to a politics like argument, right?
So you're saying that, yeah,
Okay.
I would say it's important. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. On racial justice, right?
Sure.
So you talk about how you should vote for you guys because when you tackle discrimination, you tackle racism. Can you just take me through that link?
Like the link of how we get there?
You know, the link of like how the vote like specifically is like good for racial justice.
Because we tell you that eminent domain specifically targets minority groups.
No, I understood all that. I understood all that. Like,
so what do you ask?
Can you just take me to the link chain of the whole contention, I guess?
That's what I just started. Okay.
Yeah, continue.
So HSR will cause harm to communities of color through eminent domain because they specifically target people of color because they live in like empirically cheaper places, and pretty much that's racist. So the judge has a moral obligation to reject any instance of racism. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
On your C2, if we're able to prove that the US has a lack of physicians right now, doesn't that make your argument non-unique insofar as these people wouldn't be able to access care anyways?
Wait, what'd you say? Sorry, you cut out.
If on C2 we're able to prove that right now in the United States there's a lack of doctors, wouldn't this mean that even if they have access, there's no one to serve them?
I would say you first have to prove that, but at the point that you like successfully
But
like without any money.
Right. If we do, doesn't that mean that these people that now have access don't actually access anything because there's no doctors to treat them?
We would argue no, but we can talk about that more in speeches. We're done with props.
Maria, are we taking prep?
No.
Okay.
Okay. The order will just be going down their keys. Is anyone not ready? Great. Time will begin now. Starting their first argument about politics. First, the Guardian 7 days ago wrote that the Roe decision decreasing in inflation and gas prices and Republican mistakes such as Trump's rating in Florida means that Democrats are taking the lead in the midterms and have the most momentum. Also, Alaska proves that the Democratic support is increasing because of factors like abortion being more important. This post-dates their evidence and takes into account recent events. Secondly, Goldberg from this month finds that it's too soon to call the outcome of the election because of new issues. For instance, issues like crime, recessions, undocumented refugees, and more are still more relevant issues. 2 months allows for October surprises to occur, which historically changes the course of the election. Third, Democrats will win. They have momentum, but new spending measures can kill it. As shown from this month finds that the party needs to adopt a third way agenda and demonstrate their ability of fiscal precedence. Democrats can't afford to be dragged further left on economic policy. The party needs to communicate about how they will lower costs. This turns the entirety of their argument because it means that the glass slipper for Democrats losing the election is increasing costs by $3 trillion. Fourth, Gardner 21 finds that HSR is unpopular. California proves, as voters are split, about 50% of the state said that we should stop building the infrastructure, which means that it definitely won't decide the elections. On their second argument about healthcare, first, McCartney from last month finds that the status quo, the government efforts solve rural healthcare. The USDA is investing $74 million into improving health facilities, which will help rural healthcare organizers expand access for over 3 million people, which means their argument is already happening right now. On the link level, first, Walters 22 finds that there are alternative causes that restrict access. A lack of insurance can lead people to skip care, for example. Additionally, 1 in 5 households speak languages other than English, which decreases effective patient care. Secondly, Thompson 22 finds that the system is flawed as the US has fewer physicians than every other country, as funding for programs is extremely poor. Indeed, many foreign trained doctors are impeded from practicing in the US, which means that even if patients get to the place, they won't get treated. Third, high-speed rail increases gentrification and land displacement for low-income communities, which means that the people that need access the most will be thrown into cyclical cycles of poverty. Go to their third argument about the economy. First, Oldland last month indicates that U.S. labor conditions check recession risk. Indeed, employment rates have increased to reach a milestone that surpasses pre-pandemic levels. This means that economic growth is increasing right now. Secondly, even if you don't buy that, Probosco from last month finds that hyperinflation is incredibly unlikely. The central bank does not pay debt with the money it creates. The money created is paid back, which is a crucial reason that monetary policy doesn't produce inflation. Third, Button 17 finds that HSR doesn't solve economic growth. The impacts are limited or negative and costs are underestimated. High-speed rail has proven to be far more expensive than to construct than suggested, and ridership tickets can't provide actual fares to pay it back. Fourth, you should err on time frame. O'Toole 21 finds that negative consequences of high-speed rail investment happen more rapidly than the benefits. Japan provides empirics that the cost contributed to the bubble's collapse and led to 2 decades of economic stagnation. Even if on the long term they benefit the economy, it collapses before we can even get there. On their fourth argument about manufacturing, first, Williams 22 finds that investment alone can't solve competitiveness against China. Trade and foreign markets are larger problems. An effective Chinese strategy also requires an active trade policy, which they don't account for in their case. Secondly, McIntyre 22 finds that deficit spending undermines competitiveness. The plan results in borrowing from China. It makes our inflation situation way worse. By borrowing from China, we can't compete with China, which is why the evidence concludes that we should decrease debt. Third, Goldberg 21 finds that competitiveness concerns with China are nonsense. The problem is that competitiveness is mirage. The major nations of the world are not to any significant degree in economic competition with each other, which is why nothing has happened. But finally, Horner 14 finds that Chinese investment is good for Africa because it allows for stable investment without strings like US aid. Most analysis of Chinese engagement with African nations focus on what China gets out of it, but it's a two-way dynamic. Their evidence doesn't account for that. At the end of the day, you're voting for the neg.
Okay, can I see the last response that's red on the C4? And can I see the second response that's red on the C3?
C4 was that the Africa response?
I didn't catch it. Just like the last thing you read on the C4.
Okay.
After we would borrow from China. And then on the C3, the second response.
What was the second response specifically? Like,
It had something to do with inflation. I didn't catch it as well. It's the one that you read right after US labor is good right now.
Hyperinflation is unlikely.
Yeah, and then just the last response in the C4. Could I see those? And then we'll run prep once we get them.
Okay. I just sent both of those. It's in the order that you asked in the same email.
Also, can we get that the US borrows from China in times of deficit spending?
Yeah.
Okay, once we get all those, we'll start that.
So I sent the first 2, which are in one email, and I just sent on a separate email that we borrow from China because of deficit spending.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take prep when our cameras turn. Wait, bro, we need this.
Wait, so y'all started prep? I'm confused.
Okay, we just got that last piece of evidence. We'll start prep now.
Hold up, do y'all mind keeping your cameras on for prep? It's kind of weird. Yeah, thank you.
All right, that was a minute of 5. Is anybody not ready? Okay, in that case, it'll be our case, their case. All right. Time begins in 3, 2, 1. On the C1, we'll see the Dems take the lead. We'll take that argument. On the C2 on real healthcare, they see the government is proving access right now. That's not true. For our uniqueness, the government is not doing anything right now. Real healthcare is still very bad. Basically, there's all causes to not getting care. That's not true. The biggest reason why broke people can't get healthcare right now is due to a lack of transport and the lack of access. That's per our case. Third, they say that it increases displacement. We'll talk about that more on their case when we respond to it. On mega regions, we'll see that U.S. labor is good right now. On the C4 and Class C Titan, they say we can't compete with China. Yes, we can. We already are right now. And we have the ability to increase manufacturing right now, and we solve back the Korean HSR. Second, they say China's FDI is good. It's not literally like China right now. They screw up countries like Africa and as well as Sri Lanka. China FDI is obviously not good. They're going to screw over more countries if the U.S. can't compete. Let's go to their case. I think top on climate, the IRA does not solve. The only risk of offense is the app. The Washington Post writes that since funding in the bill will be done in 2030, the IRA would have zero effect on U.S. emissions, specifically decrease emissions by only 0.0009 degrees. Second, you can turn it because HSR decreases emissions in 3 ways. The first is by going to a more renewable source. And the other right that HSR offers a proven means of reducing dependence and increasingly a problematic source of oil. Since electricity can be created through a mix of sources that incorporate hydro, solar, and wind energy, and improvement will proceed introducing a new form of energy into transport. The ASB in 2020 indicates that national HSR system powered by this energy could cut the nation's carbon output by 70%. So second, a second is by making more energy efficient. A Dutch 10 writes that high-speed electric trains are more efficient, and an electric train produce 90% less pollution than a car and 91% less by plane. The APTA 11 predicts a savings of 6 billion pounds of CO2 per year if an HSR were to be built in America or across the world. But first on time frame, their links only trigger during the construction of HSR, while our benefits last indefinitely during the operation of HSR, meaning our links compound over theirs and be all the way on scope. On the C2 on racial injustice, they're linked essentially like talking about a displacement. We argue you can turn it because HSR decreases land use on net. The APTA writes that 1 million fewer acres of land would need to be developed from the current trends, given investment scenario, including HSR. That means we are way on scope. Even if HSR displaces people at the start, the HSR uses less land compared to the current infrastructure we have right now. That means we are better than status quo. There's a reason to vote for AF right there. We solve back for their argument. But second, turn it again because HSR decreases land prices. The Free 21 writes that the HSR people would rather move to smaller cities with more affordable housing costs, but still work in a larger city where it takes too much time to drive and to cost to fly. If 2018 fails by helping cities to decentralize, HSR reduces growth in land prices across the region. That always there a case on scope because their link is limited to people that are being displaced right next to rail itself. While HSR decreases housing prices across the entire country, we impact a bigger spread of people, meaning we access the entire US that turns their link. Then you can then their link is like non-unique. They say like inter-products in the state level HSR are already displacing people, meaning that on the next terms are entirely non-unique. The only risk of like decreasing displacement on net is the app. But finally, on the racism impact, don't them read any new top-level framing in future speeches, future speeches, especially in the summary. It's way too late to shift the focus of the debate. And Alan writes that since poverty disproportionately hurts minorities, poverty is one of the worst forms of structural violence and suffering, meaning that any link we have into poverty controls a larger link with their case. That point, we outweigh their case. Go to the CT on water pollution. At the top, cosplay all the words is how HSR decreases pollution and emissions. And that's when we make this the status cleaner for water than how it is. But second, their evidence is miscut, includes that British and other infrastructure have higher pollution levels. There is no contextualization or terminal impacts how worse HSRs than other infrastructure. But then you turn it because after an empirical study, gathers that HSRs completely decrease all types of pollution in China. This is not only because HSR is more energy efficient, but also per their own evidence, less pollution than other infrastructure like highways and bridges. At that point, we are better solvency. But finally, you turn it again because the operation savings outweighs. CHSR 19 writes that construction pollution impacts would be stopped with offsets. Operation would result in net benefit because HSR would result in lower pollution during operation. Prefer our evidence after hallucinating the most conservative estimates. Shangla includes that CRF begins to decrease pollution's offsets in 6 years after an operation with a shorthand compared to the design life of an HSR. Thus, we're voting for the F.
So first, can I have the last response you just read?
On the C3.
Yeah, the last response
Okay.
you just read. And then you cut out, what was the non-unique on our C2 about racism?
The non-unique on our here, I'll just send like what I read, the paraphrase. Wait, do you want the cards on the last response or just
I just want like you just cut out, like a quick 5-second explanation would be fine.
Oh, we just said the link is non-unique because you guys talk about input products in the state level. HSR is already displacing people mean that the next harms are entirely non-unique and only risk of decreasing in displacement on net is the F.
Okay.
And then do you just want like the paraphrase for the last response with the cards?
No, I want the evidence.
Okay, sounds good. I'll send that.
Oh, actually, and also the first response on our C1 that the bill isn't sufficient.
Okay.
Okay, so we sent the last response on the C3.
Yeah, give me a second. I'm sending one of the first response in the C1, right?
Yeah, just let me know when you send everything.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just send this in a separate email. All right, both cards should be sent.
I'll let you know when I get it.
Okay.
I got the emission one. I'll let you know when I get the second one. Okay, we'll take a second to prep. Okay, that was 6 seconds. Okay, are you good for cross?
Yeah, I'm good for cross.
Like, can I take the first question?
Yeah, go for it.
So on your case, you just say that like you just say that investment is good. Look at Africa. Our warranting from the evidence that we read is that sure, your studies, however, don't account for the two-side benefit, which means that on net, it's better than US investment because there's no ties to it. At that point, how is look at Africa responsive at all?
What we would argue is that because China's debt trap a lot of countries right now, like Sri Lanka and Africa, the US is probably a better indicator of like what they would do if they
Well,
put an
so
HSR.
none
They'd
of
be a
your
better alternative.
So none of your evidence implicates that. You also don't make that response. You just say, look at Africa. Third,
But we tell you that like it would be
Okay,
a better
but
alternative because China
right, but
screwed over
you
countries.
right. The issue with that is that you can see the warranting from the evidence that, for example, it's also tied to like US, like the US also has certain ties, like not specifically debt traps, but things like aid, that things like they have to repay back, right? So insofar as like you don't win that it's the better alternative, you just default to like neither are good, which means you don't really gain any offense.
No, we would argue that because like China is empirically debt trapped countries, because they have literally no alternative, the US would fill in for that alternative. Even if the US like might even like it might not be like as great, like it's still a better alternative to like what the China's like debt trap is like doing right now in the status quo. Is what we're saying.
Not
Can I have a
responsive.
question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. On your guys' water pollution argument, like if HSR decreases like all pollution like on net, how does like HSR lead to like water pollution and contamination?
Yeah, so you just like cross apply the same response on like 8 different parts of our case.
We read
But
the evidence that like
the issue with this is that you concede in your case that because of like California and other countries prove that the infrastructure itself takes decades to build, even if you solve in the long term, since you also concede the Zalke evidence, which says that any small increase would push us past the brink, the most important thing is solving now. This means that even if you win, that on the long term in 40 years, it's going to be better for the environment. Throughout those 40 years, small increments are going to push hundreds of millions of people into this.
We also give you like the empirical analysis from China that indicates that on net they've decreased pollution in all sectors, like including water contamination by a certain percentage.
That's fine. On the long term, after it was built, that's the analysis that you don't you completely mishandle. You can win that on the long term.
That just means like your impact is only like short term, right? It means it doesn't impact like the long term.
So not necessarily. We're just making the analysis that even if in some way you win, that after the infrastructure is built in 40 years, it's good. Our Zalke evidence, which you concede, finds that small increments and increases right now are going to push us way past the brink and also push millions and hundreds of millions of people into poverty, which means that like the long term doesn't really matter. But that's like basically cross.
Okay, good cross.
We're going to take some cross.
Okay.
That was 35 seconds. The order is going to be, wait, let me just write down 35 seconds. The order is going to be my first contention on climate change, and then their arguments, and then weighing. Is anyone not ready? Judges, the easiest place to vote is our first contention on climate change. The argument is very clear. Lefebvre last month wrote that U.S. just passed the largest climate bill in history to decrease emissions, and O'Toole 21 writes that HSR requires large amounts of energy to be built and powered, which is only going to drastically increase emissions. Then Zalk writes that we're approaching the point of no return and acting now is key, and Russell 21 concludes that consequences are linear. Even a small increase can displace millions, and women suffer really badly from this because we have seen empirically that climate change means that they face like more assault and they have less access to education. They don't respond to this. What they do say is that like they respond to uniqueness. They say like this bill that was passed will have no effect. We called for their evidence. Their evidence they give us isn't even about the same bill we talk about. Please read that. But second, they read no counter evidence that it's going to decrease now, which means you prefer ours, which tells you that it is going to decrease now. Then they read you a turn that HSR goes to renewable sources. We have two responses here. First, they don't respond to our evidence from case that says that it will take 71 years for HSR to actually come back from all the emissions that they produce from construction. But second, they concede analysis on their case that HSR takes decades to be built, meaning that they, even if you do believe they still solve here, it's way too long. Then they tell you to weigh on time frame because they have future solvency. However, they don't respond to Zalk, which tells you that we need to act now. We're at the tipping point, which is why negation is key. Then on racism, on eminent domain, we'll concede the non-unique that like it's happening now, which means that their turns don't matter. And then on water pollution, all they say is that like HSR will decrease emissions. I already responded to this earlier. Let's go on to their case. This is really problematic on C2 when they don't respond to two things. First, remember that we tell you that the government already invested $74 million to solve healthcare access. They just tell you that rural healthcare is low right now, obviously because this bill was just passed. We are going to see these impacts later on. But then we tell you that there's all causes such as cost and language barriers, and they say that it's lack of transfer. Judges, think of it like this. Even if I have access to a hospital and I get there, there's going to be no physicians to treat me. I'm not going to have the money to pay for it, and I won't even know the language to speak to these doctors. So even if there's access, this is a prereq because you aren't getting treated in the first place. Then they completely concede the term that tells you that HSR means, actually no, not on that. Let's go into fourth contention. They concede a couple of stuff. First, they tell you that investment alone can't solve this, which means that if you vote AF, you aren't actually solving for any of this. This goes completely conceded. But then the most important thing is what Maria tells you in the rebuttal, that deficit spending means we borrow from China, meaning that we aren't actually going to be competing with them, which means that their argument is completely non-unique and it isn't actually going to happen. This goes completely conceded. You cannot vote here. There's no offense. But on to weighing. We outweigh in two ways. Our Zalke evidence goes conceded and finds that acting now is key as increases push us past the brink. This means that even if they solve climate change, it does not happen for decades. But second, our argument about climate change is global and is a prerequisite as it pushes millions into poverty and death. Climate change exacerbates structural issues like racism and gendered violence at a global scale, which means it outweighs all other impacts. It outweighs all their impact because marginally worse in a world past the tipping point, which is why you're voting here. You're voting on so much. They have no offense left in the round, and our climate change basically goes conceded.
All right, we'll take prep. I think we have about 2 minutes left. Starting now.
I have that as all y'all's prep.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that is all the prep. Okay, so order is going to be our case, your guys' case, Wing. All right. Just get on the dock real quick. Okay. Yeah. Time begins in 3, 2, 1. First, go to Clash of the Titans. We'll concede the entire contention. You can kick it. Now, onto the most important argument in the round, contention 2 on rural healthcare. Currently, 20% of the U.S. population cannot get healthcare. That's Warsaw 17. That's primarily due to a lack of transportation. As cited, all 13 find the transportation necessary for healthcare. CM21 quantifies that that's 4 million people that can't get healthcare because they don't have access to reliable and safe transportation. Thankfully, HSR solves, as HSR stations lead to an integration of local and long-distance public transport and allow doctors to come to them. That's woo. Empirically, this occurred in Korea. That's choi. Healthcare access is key as it prevents 100,000 deaths each year. They just say like that currently right now the government is doing it. Sure, it's been bad, but in the future, what we're telling you is it's been bad. It's going to be even worse because the government bill doesn't even address transport. Transport is literally the thing that's keeping 4 million people out of hospitals and are in rural America right now. The government bill doesn't address the root cause. Then they said there's a bunch of these alt causes, but realize that they completely concede our CM21 card that says 4 million people don't seek care because they don't have access to reliable and safe transportation. At that point, even if 1 in 5 speak something other than English and there's no physicians, that doesn't matter because the root cause is actually just reliable and safe transportation. That's the majority that we're getting access to. At that point, you know that we get access to our, in fact, 100K people dying per year. Now, let's go to their case where they make a lot of critical errors. First, on the thing about the IRA, they say extend the Washington Post evidence. This is about the Inflation Reduction Act. We're talking about the same thing. They've conceded the warning that since the IRA cuts funding after less than 10 years, it will have zero effect on U.S. emissions. This warning is conceded, meaning their entire link is non-unique. Then extend the renewables term that says that since HSR is powered by electricity, it can integrate renewables into its power source, allowing us to gradually transition to a predominantly renewable transportation system, decreasing emissions by 70%. Even if you buy their Brink analysis, the impact is limited to the construction timeframe. Our links solve all the way back and decrease emissions indefinitely into the future. No warning as to why we can't reverse any harm. Lastly, extend APTA on their C2. They've conceded that HSR uses 1 million fewer acres of land and decreases land use on net. Definitionally meaning the construction of HSR is better for the environment compared to the infrastructure that we build otherwise. This directly turns our construction link and acts as their short-term Brink analysis because at that point, we're not using as much land, we're not doing as much like bad things for the climate. Now go to their weighing where they try to tell you that like acting now is like really key for the climate. But realize that they concede our turn at that point. We access every single one of their weighing as well as their prereqs about how it's marginally worth using climate on everything. Then on their prereq specifically, when they say that climate makes everything worse, that's actually not true. Operation savings like outweigh because like we would be able to like stop climate change in the future. Now to wait on our own. Our impact is about death from like healthcare, and theirs is about climate change. Realize that insofar as we're already solving climate change, but we're not currently solving death from like low healthcare access. At that point, we have to like prioritize our things because we're the only ones giving solvency. While in their world, the IRA is already solving. The IRA like is gonna like be cut in like 10 years. At that point, you have to like further from.
Okay. Can I take the first question?
Yeah, sure.
So in your final speech right now, you just ended your speech with climate change is already being solved by the IRA. That means that
was like a miss.
No. Like you made the full analysis that the IRA will solve in 10 years and it's already being addressed.
No, we said that's gonna be cut within 10 years.
No. Which puts you in a huge, you literally said that the IRA is already solving.
No, we said that the IRA is not solving. In the next 10 years, it's gonna be cut.
The last thing you just said in your summary was climate change is being solved for right now.
So we should prioritize your arguments. That was your weighing analysis. That means
that was not my weighing.
Your analysis was like I'm pretty sure everyone heard it. You say the IRA is already solving climate change. So because our issues are
we say that the IRA cuts funding after less than 10 years.
I know I'm not crazy. You just said that the IRA is already solving climate change, which means that we should focus on your issues because they're not being solved.
No, that was like a misspeech. Like that's not what I meant to say.
So just disregard the entirety of your weighing? Okay.
No, like just I corrected it right after. If you like don't worry about
that. So the only weighing that you have left is that on the long term you solve, right?
Sure. If you want to talk about weighing, we talk about it in next speech. But can I get a question real quick?
Yeah.
So specifically on rural healthcare on our case, right? Sure. So is the government bill like does it specifically address transport?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, you can ask for the.
And can you like read me exactly what the bill is?
So your argument on healthcare is that transportation barrier prevents 4 million people from getting access. The mistake that you make is that sure, that might be a huge barrier for 4 million people, but it doesn't mean that it's the only barrier. Let's say that those people are actually able to get to these centers.
What we're saying is your thing is just mitigatory. It doesn't
No. It doesn't change the fact that one, they can't pay for it because of a lack of insurance. Two, there's not enough physicians because there's a shortage in the US, so they can't even be treated. And 3, 1 in 5 vulnerable households don't even speak English.
No, we're saying that transportation is like the only reason. That's our evidence. Like,
no. Your evidence doesn't say that it's the only reason. It just says that 4 million people are preventing from getting access because of transportation. It doesn't say that it's the only barrier. I've read your
okay.
evidence.
When you say that like because of transportation they're prevented, obviously like that means that transportation is like the main or sole reason that they're not seeking care.
It doesn't mean that it doesn't. No. Your evidence doesn't say that it's the only reason. It says that it's a big reason, which we agree with, but it doesn't mean that it solves for the other factors that are inherently going to prevent people from getting care, which you fundamentally concede throughout every speech. But you can take a question.
You can have a question.
I just took one.
No, that was my question.
Elon, do you have one?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, I don't have one either. So that's like.
Yeah,
we can just
like
stop
10 seconds left anyways.
Yeah.
We have 20 left of prep, so I'll start that when I get on a call with Maria. All right, Maria, I'll start it. I'll start the time now.
How much prep are you guys running, by the way?
Just unmute it to say that we just took.
Oh, my bad. You're good.
No, you're good. You're good. So it's gonna start on weighing, then my case, and then their case. Is anyone not ready? Great. Time will begin. Now, they only have one piece of weighing left. They conceded that in cross, which is that they solve for climate change in the long term. First and most importantly, they concede Zolke in every speech, which finds that we're approaching the point of no return, and small increases can push us over the brink, which means that we can't solve for it in 40 years. Even if they win, that they will solve for climate change in 40 years, it doesn't matter because we won't be able to reverse the effects by then. Secondly, climate change pushes millions of people globally into poverty and death, which exacerbates structural issues that prevent people from getting healthcare, like their case, which means that climate change will only make their argument exponentially worse at a global scale. Finally, they only saved like 100,000 deaths per their argument. Our argument is that if a small increases push 10 millions of people into displacement. At that point, you're running on our argument about climate change. Our evidence finds that the US passed the largest climate bill in history, which is decreasing emissions, but high-speed rail requires large amounts of energy to be built and powered, which increases emissions. We're approaching the point of no return for the Zolke evidence, and the Russell evidence finds that consequences are linear. Even a small increase pushes millions of people into poverty. The one response that they give you is that the bill isn't going to solve one. They just say that it's going to solve by a small amount, which means that it's on that still decreasing. But secondly, we'd say that even if it doesn't solve, their argument just substantially increases emissions, which pushes hundreds of millions of people into poverty, which means that it gets way, way worse in their case. Secondly, they say that they solve in the long term. Again, it doesn't matter. The brink is coming now. That's the analysis that's conceded. In 40 years, over like 400 million people will be dead for climate change. It doesn't matter. At that point, go to their case, they make a huge mistake when they go for their C2 on healthcare. The one response that they have is that the biggest transportation barrier is access to these centers. Their evidence doesn't isolate the fact that it's the only barrier. Let's say that I get to the medical center, if I can't pay for the medical care, if there's no physicians to treat me, and if I don't speak the language, that's going to substantially undermine healthcare, even if they win. At the end of the day, that their argument is fundamentally true. It doesn't matter insofar as their evidence doesn't account for the myriad of other reasons that are going to prevent care. At the end of the day, vote on climate change. It's way bigger than their impact.
Okay, we have no prep left, so I'll go. The order of final focus will just be our case, their case, weighing in between and after. Okay, time begins in, oh, is anybody not ready? Give me a go. Okay, sounds good. Time begins in 3, 2, 1. At this point, the only neg path to the ballot is non-legal. We are winning a risk of offense on their case. So their weighing doesn't matter. We control an independent link into it via a clean link to that. We read about the IRA and as well how the HSR decreases emissions on net. The cleanest place to vote and the cleanest piece of offense left in the round is our argument on rural healthcare. Our argument is very clear. What we tell you right now is that rural healthcare is terrible and it's in the gutter right now. However, HSR uniquely gives rural farmers as well as rural workers the ability to leave their rural areas and go to healthcare officials and see a doctor. We argue that 4 million people in status quo right now can't see a doctor due to transportation. Overall, that would solve 100,000 lives from being saved every single year. They extend one response to these alternative causes. Realize they don't respond to the root cause. The root cause is transportation. Even if people have language barriers, at best, it's mitigation to our case. That's why we terminalize our impact by saying that we save 100,000 lives. At that point, it doesn't matter if there's all causes. The main cause right now is going to be transportation. But let's talk about their case. Extending non-unique about the IRA. We are talking about the same thing in today's debate. They have fundamentally conceded the warning that since the IRA cuts funding at less than 10 years, it'll have zero effect on emissions. This warning conceded means there's no offense for them. Even if they say the IRA doesn't solve, it doesn't matter because the IRA is not going to solve any person. That means that they have no offense there. But then the APTA term that we read ends the round. They have conceded the link that HSR uses 1 million fewer acres of land and decreases land use on net. Definitionally meaning the construction of HSR is net better for the environment compared to the infrastructure that they would have in their voting status quo. This directly turns their construction link and accesses their short-term brick analysis. If you buy these short-term climate change matters, that means we on net solve the best. And if you want to extend the term, because HSR uses our renewable energy, we decrease emission on net by 70%. At that point, we win the turns on their case and also winning the weighing. We are the better link in climate because we A, use less land, B, use more our renewable energy, and finally, we are the better predication because right now the IRA already solves back the mission that they talk, because the IRA won't solve back the mission that they talk about. We're the only risk of offense. You have to vote for the affirmative here. At the end of the day, it's a clean turn on their case. We're the cleanest place to vote on our side. The IRA isn't going to solve right now. The only risk of offense is through the affirmative. Good round, guys.
Good round, guys.
Good round.
Good job.
Great debate. Can I see the brink analysis evidence from NSU?
Okay, I just sent the Zalke evidence, which is the brink analysis.
Okay, unusually for me, I'm the last one in. This was a very entertaining debate, and congratulations to both teams on advancing to the semifinals. The decision is a 2-1 for the negative from NSU.
All right, I'll go first since I voted affirmative. I voted on the racism turn. It's that simple. Wasn't addressed at all. The final speech, I think it's a clean turn. And it's a voting issue. So, I mean, you guys set that up. So
Okay, I
that's
can go
what I
next.
voted.
I vote for NSU. I don't, considering Miraloma, considering that you conceded the weighing on climate change, I don't know why you spend like a minute of your final focus talking about rural healthcare, since you're not going to contest the fact that climate change is more important. So I don't care about rural healthcare, despite the fact I don't even want to get into like who won it or not. I think that NSU's case is pretty clean on the link level. I give them access to it. There's not really, whether the IRA cuts funding or not, it doesn't matter because they don't have to prove that the SCRO is getting better, just that affirming is worse. On the turns, I think that you do win the turns, but I don't think you do enough work on the brink analysis because, right, like the brink is going to happen in 2030. HSR takes 2 or 4 decades to get built. And by that time, it's too late. It's a pretty easy con ballot for me, despite the fact that the turns are clean. I don't really know what to do with the turns, right? You just say like, oh, we're going to use less land. I don't know why that's important for like climate change. I don't know what that does. It's like very uncontextualized. There's I don't know what that like how that compares to the massive increase in emissions. How long is it going to take to offset? I can't feel comfortable voting off the turns. I honestly think it would have been intervention on my part. It's very, very easy to vote for NSU.
Yeah, I largely agree with Cecilia's analysis, especially the point about link uniqueness, which is something that I want to stress, although it didn't factor into my decision, because I think that both sides kind of missed the boat on the debate about the 1AC's contention one, the politics argument, right? So the negative argues a straight link turn to this contention, which has a nuclear war impact. And the second affirmative speaker attempts to kick out of the contention by conceding that it's not unique. I think that the negative should have pounced all over that. You can't get out of a link turned position by conceding uniqueness. The negative story is Democrats win now. The plan is unpopular because Democratic voters view it as financially wasteful. Conceding that Democrats win now just makes the turn unique. So the negative story going into the first rebuttal should have been, all right, they functionally conceded our turns to this argument. Our story is Democrats win the election now. The plan causes a Republican wave because moderate voters view it as wasteful. That leads to Trump re-election and nuclear war, and there's 100% risk, which outweighs all of the rest of their residual impacts on which we've got defense. I mean, that is an absolutely clean kill for you that I think that you missed, because maybe you were not formally taught, you know, the way that uniqueness and link turns interact at any point, but that is something that surprised me. Otherwise, the other thing that I add to the analysis that Cecilia gave is I think that the affirmative needs to put in some effort beating back this terminal impact weighing claim, specifically the turns case argument, i.e. that climate change inhibits people's ability to access healthcare worldwide by creating all sorts of additional difficulties for them, which isn't answered at all, which, you know, is extremely problematic for me in terms of being able to resolve the debate in favor of the affirmative, because I think that even if you all win that, you know, access to healthcare is the most important impact of the round, i.e. even if you had extended some of these structural violence claims that exist further up on the flow, I mean, that's not relevant where your opponents are definitely winning at least some risk that voting for you expands the scope of the very adverse impact that you're trying to claim. And that's about all I've got, but I'm easy to find if you've got other questions later.
Thank you all so much, and good luck to you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
guys.
thank you guys too.
Good round.